Hi, welcome to Chamber Chats. I'm Bruce Williams, CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. That's why this is called Chamber Chats. I would like to begin, of course, by acknowledging that I live and work in the ancestral lands of the Lekwungen-speaking Coast Salish nations, the Songhees and the Esquimalt. Pleased and proud to be living and working alongside them every day. Today on the Chats, this is part two of a conversation we started last week with Joe O'Rourke, who's the Vice President and General Manager of a massive operation in town that we all kind of know about, but we're telling you more about the Seaspan Victoria Shipyards, who are proud supporters of programs like this, along with our friends at Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union. So, Joe, you've got 26 acres, up to 1,500 people working there at any one given time. Let's talk about this in terms of COVID now. Supply lines have been interrupted for every sector of our economy. Tell me how that's impacted the shipyard.
Not as much as others. Of course, supply line area, besides price increases, besides having to increase your lead times and such as, and put in buffers in there to ensure that's it's getting here. It would have had a huge impact if we were still doing cruise ships, but that kind of solved itself because they have a logistics strain that starts 6 months to a year prior to the arrival of the vessel. So we are thankful in terms of, first of all, is since we work these major programs, they develop a certain amount of inventory of materials they draw on, such as, and then there's some commonality. And of course, Canada is very big about their programs and buying Canadian materials, Canadian source materials. So we haven't had to reach out as much. On New Zealand, when we were finishing off those frigates, those got a little difficult because again, we were required to go to Europe and other sources. And of course, that whole transportation network. But in comparison to other industries that have tried to fight their way through it, look at our pathway there is so much less than them. So it was there. It created challenges, but they were challenges we could overcome.
Uh, you had mentioned before about the cruise ship work not being there. Is there anything else throughout the pandemic that has impacted either the nature of the work you do or the volume of the work you do? Has anything appeared that you didn't have before, for example?
Uh, Not really. No, actually, tell you what is, and it was interesting last year when COVID happened. Um, is we're already falling off to a normal volume level. So our volume wasn't impacted as much because it was very based on basically serving our primary customer, the Canadian Navy, or these contracts that are already locked in here, like New Zealand, and then support of NSS finishing off the OFSV 3 series ships that our sister ship Vancouver Shipyard built. This year, we actually were more negatively impacted by COVID because, again, it wiped out cruise ships. Normally, we would have done 3. Because of COVID affecting our customer and their timing of it. This is actually the first summer and this year where we don't have a dry docking on the frigate just because COVID and everything else made the last contract go long. And so we kind of missed the window. So COVID has caused impact in our customer base, which has caused a flow down for us. So the interesting thing, 2021 to us in terms of volume has created much more of a level of difficulty than actually 2020. Overall, with COVID and everything else, is when you are basically your whole business is based on the quality of the people that you put out there, either directly on the ship or support the ship. Look at taking care of them. Right now is it's not the pandemic itself, it is the mental toil of dealing with a pandemic that is the number one issue for us. It is, again, just the care and custody of our people, keeping them safe, giving them a sense of assurance that they're coming to a safe place to work every day, and then just making all the allowances of realizing how difficult life is in so many areas right now, that as a company, as an organization and leadership, our ultimate focus is the day-to-day health of our people. And right now it is almost leaning more toward the mental health of our people than the physical health. Upside to COVID you see is we did not have a cold and flu season this year,
There you
Bruce.
go. Yeah.
And then the second thing, where ship repair used to be the mentality of, if you're sick, you just go to work, pound through, the ship's got. The thing is, one thing COVID did change was if you feel ill, you will stay home. Please stay home. You could see now that the regulatory is coming out, moving from safety plans to infectious disease plans.
Yeah.
There's certain aspects. I just came out of a meeting. We are not giving up the rule of if you feel ill, stay home. That is going to be a hard rule going to the future. Now, again, how you monitor and discipline it, that's a whole different question, or do it. Um, Having wash stations at the front of every vessel so people wash their hands going on and off. Certain cleaning protocols that we're going to do that we plan to continue whether COVID goes away is because again, as if you looked at it, I think we actually lost less days of sickness because of COVID, because the steps we did for COVID just almost eliminated the cold and flu season, which again, at times was taking out 5% of your workforce during the winter season.
Yeah, I'm going to be wearing a mask next winter and every winter because I didn't get sick either, right? Why not?
It's why not? And again, and who knows how what the flu is going to come back when you it kind of skipped a year like that.
Yeah,
So,
no
but
kidding.
again, that's again is the whole thing is okay. We all got to move past being fear based and turn to back to opportunity based, and that's one of the things again with leadership is showing a sense of optimism, showing a sense of there's a future later. And yes, as in all things, is always being fear based is not a path for either as an individual, as a company, as which is the path we should be following.
Yeah. We talked the last time we did this interview last week about that splendid sight of driving down Admiral's Road and seeing a
Hmm.
cruise ship all lit up,
Hmm.
like right there in somebody's backyard, it almost
Hmm.
looks like. So when you're doing that work with the repair work on the cruise ships and the tune up, if you will,
Hmm.
Ogden Point, which we know is the cruise ship terminal
Hmm.
here, has a plan in place that they're looking at putting shore power in for the
Hmm.
electrification of
Yes.
cruise ships. Are you involved in that kind of conversion that converts them over to electric?
Look at that. Actually, to the against, we would be involved with that is, but that is a very, very simple thing. Is that is basically really what you're doing is you're putting a large plug or a large cord for a plug that goes into a plug. Their effort, of course, is huge. They have to run the power lines. It's a huge amount of power in there, and then create up a system. But from the ship repair side, is it's basically a couple 3 to 5 inch electrical cables, huge, that basically trail off the ship, and you basically plug them in just like you'd plug a lamp at home. It is a great idea. It should make once they get there, it should make I lived my first year in James Bay and enjoyed some of the reactions of James Bay to having Ogden Point there. There will be some many place people that the engines get turned off and realize, yes, because they are a small city, they're usually running a generator or two to power it, and they don't have the power out there. There's been power upgrades here in the shipyard, and part of the future plans again is to look at that. Is that a possibility that we could also do here within the shipyard, both for the cruise ship and our other customers? Because again, with the power upgrades that they've accomplished over the last couple of years, it's within the reason of feasibility, and so we certainly are having that discussions with the owner of the facility, the Canadian government.
Yeah. Interesting to hear about ships from the Navy in New Zealand coming here to have work done. I want to talk about that next. We are doing our podcast today, the Chamber Chat with Joe O'Rourke, Vice President and General Manager of Seaspan Victoria Shipyards, one of our chamber champions at the Victoria Chamber. So, naval ships from New Zealand arrive here.
Hmm.
How does that
Yeah.
happen?
Well, it happens first of all is it starts off and there's a program called FELEX, and FELEX was the upgrade of the 12 vessels, the 12 Canadian frigates that we operate as the primary vessels for the Canadian fleet. We have 5 of them here. There's 7 on the East Coast. We upgraded 5 of them, so they were over a year-long project. So they were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours, a lot of maintenance, but also upgraded with systems, combat systems, communication systems, basically lifting them up to the next level. Because again, that is, in military is they're always upgrading and such, and realize NATO, whether you call it the Five Eye countries or NATO and such, is the ability to communicate and work together as a group is huge. And those upgrades were required to be in sync to be able to work with New Zealand, Australia, the U.S. Navy. Realized that they work together on many occasions in terms of basically defending the free world. Um, Out of that came was, well, New Zealand has 2 frigates. Realize they're a country of only about 4 million, but they have their pride. They have 2 frigates. They also need to do the upgrade for the communication systems and everything to allow them to play well with others. Here we are as a proven example. I would say the Canadian government, that the overall FELEX program, which was the upgrade, is may have been the best government program, military acquisition program I've seen on either side of the border.
Hmm.
It came in on time and under budget, and name me a a military program that came in on time and under budget.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. So that leveraged the discussion with New Zealand. I then realized it's New Zealand, which is a very small industry. They have a tendency to go to Australia. If you've been down there and seen the relationship between Australia and New Zealand, it's pretty interesting. But here we were, we understood how to do it, and it led to a discussion. And with the arrival, okay, and so we built onto the skill set that we achieved in the Canadian Navy. And in fact, is just do it. There is a group called the Five I countries, and it's basically U.S., Australia, New Zealand, UK, and Canada, and they have a certain security arrangement and a military support arrangement just unique to those Five Eyes. So we have now, and then the other thing about New Zealand, it was the first time a combat vessel had been maintained on the ship repair and conversion side since World War II in Canada. So it was an event we hadn't seen in over 75 years. We just did a small job on an Australian new destroyer when it was over there across the water at the Federal Maintenance Facility. So my goodness, we've now done three. I'm looking for a US and a UK customer so we can do 5 out of 5.
There you
But
go.
again, as it is just one of those natural things. You build a capability, you prove that you'll be able to do it, and it allows you opportunities to go seek elsewhere. And again, is as long as you're staying if within the free world, within NATO, within the Five Eye countries, there's opportunities there that we see and we continue to pursue.
Yeah, that Australian ship that was here, my understanding is that that's the model that's going to be built for the incoming Canadian naval ships in the new models. Is that right?
Your knowledge will be better than mine. I knew it was a brand new destroyer built in 2020, and it had couple little tweaks since it's doing its kind of, I think it's world tour, but I do not have knowledge of that. Good looking vessel though.
Oh, yeah. It was very slick.
Good looking vessel.
Really was. Let's talk about the environmental side of this. You've done a great deal at Seaspan to green
Mhm,
your operation.
mhm.
It's good for the planet, but it's good for business too. Tell me about that.
Well, I'll tell you what, it is. I'm very proud of this group, and again, I'm proud of C-SPAN overall that recognizes this. And again, as this is my third shipyard. I always went with the saying: is 100 years from now, I want my grandchild to fish off this pier and be able to eat what they catch. That's the rule out there. Now, having a graving dock with a big ditch and a caisson, it allows containment a lot easier than floating docks or anything else. So we have a facility advantage in terms of that. But no, we are constantly looking to upgrade and realize it is actually a function of our bonus plans. They call them KPIs, key performance indicators.
Mhm.
Any spills, anything that hits the ground and such is counted against our KPI. We do lead the divisions and I think the industry in terms of that, but it gets counted. But it just forces. For example, most of our moving equipment is now has vegetable oil instead of any type of hydrocarbon oil in forklifts, man lifts, and those type of equipment. So when a hose breaks, and think of the 1,000 times a day that happens across North America,
Yeah.
well, instead of hydrocarbons hitting the ground, which is not a good thing, basically vegetable oil, which is fish food, hits the ground. And so instead of, and if it gets to the water, it's an additive. Something's going to eat it. It's not going to pollute it. Those things. We have a green initiative in terms of recycling waste. We actually lead our three divisions. We just hit 46% of all waste in our organization is now recycled. Now, the cost of every percentage after that is hard to do, but just to see a company trying to get to a point where we recycle 100% of the waste that comes out of that, that is a great goal to have. And then again, is just safety and environmental are core values that we believe in, our workforce believes in. And again, is just like, again, the First Nations were here for 10,000 years fishing and living off this area that we lived off of. We have an obligation and the honor of continuing our tradition that those waters and those lands are going to be protected every day that we were allowed to work on these lands.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that in the next part of our conversation too. Talking today with Joe O'Rourke on Chamber Chats. He's the Vice President and General Manager of Seaspan Victoria Shipyards. So engagement with Indigenous employees and culture, Joe. We
Hmm.
are living and working on their lands, as we always
Hmm.
acknowledge. And the operation, sort of part one of this thing that we did with Joe last week explains
Hmm.
about the graving dock and the
Hmm.
caisson and all that stuff. But as we move forward and source workforce, you're very engaging with the Indigenous business model and with Indigenous employees. Tell me about that and why it's so important to you.
First, I go back to it is, and this came from Chief Andy, and I mean, I know you ran into Chief Andy before.
Andy Thomas. Yeah.
Andy Thomas, he passed on. Is again, he come along is, and you would see him stand up and said, "We have lived and fished and thing is on the lands of the waters for 10,000 years." What's the power of 10,000 years? Okay, so that gives an obligation just by itself. Now, realize is, and actually, I got a book here. 21 things you may not know about
The
the
Indian Act.
Indian
Yeah, I've
Act.
read it.
Look at you can see everything that's coming out in the paper, and some of the thing is, look at we went out and bought 10 copies, and I'm reading it right now, and it will go through our leadership team. The best thing we could do right now is to continue to seek knowledge of understanding what did happen, and such is because we can't move to the future without knowing the past. So just in terms of direct engagement is look at both First Nations, talking to both chiefs, always being available. We did a lot of outreach during COVID and do it what we could support because again, as those were endangered communities, they had a higher risk factor and such as. And then one of the best things we can do is look at. We always talk about the multi-generational. Is look at it's multi-generation in this shipyard for First Nations always. We want to create opportunities. First Nation men and women just starting up is we are going to allow the first step in the door, whether it's either adding them to our labor workforce and starting the path, creating opportunities into the apprentice programs, either by ours or apprentices, get them look at they like women and First Nations and such is in if all things are equal, they get to go in the door first. Now, having said that, you have to go out and prove to meet the standard of our expectations in terms of level of effort, respect for each other, treatment of each other, all to do that. But that really is the best thing we can do. There's still a long journey for Canada and First Nations to go. Um, you can I'll always go Martin Luther King. The arc of history bends toward justice, and I do think I see that now being in heading my 65th year. But still lots to do. What can we do? We can be there. We can continue advance to both First Nations that we are directly tied to any type of improvements in the local community, offering business opportunities. But one of the best things we can do is look at your kids can work right here, right next door, right on your territorial lands. I think that right now is the greatest economic effect we can have. And then, as everything else is, we can listen, Bruce. We can just listen. And I think that's going to be radically important over the next couple of years.
Yeah, agreed. The fact that you provide support for this podcast along with other partners like Island Savings, you and I countless times have stood side by side speaking with your staff and your employees about the United Way when I was campaign
Hmm.
chair, and you're a big
Hmm.
supporter. But you do so much for so many. The entire company does, and your imprint on this community is huge. Why
Hmm.
is that so important to the culture of your company?
Well, first of all, is we have the luxury of being good at what we do. We produce good financial results, and again, our ownership does come back to the U.S. and it's the Washington family. And you can look on Forbes lists; they're on their list of really rich people,
Yeah.
and they are also of an age and a maturity as such as they're heavily in the give back, basically phase of their life. Kyle Washington, who has basically taken over, he's chairman of the board of all the Canadian companies. He is actually a Canadian citizen, lives in Vancouver. He's a huge supporter of all things and basically is. It allowed us to give, I think you saw, we gave through the Washington Foundation, we gave $2.65 million to the high acuity unit at Royal Jubilee. And I think at Impetus, they actually finished off their whole $7 million raise, I think about 2 months ago.
Hmm.
Um, but it is part of the culture I inherited, and I certainly support it. Is we are a large, as you stated, and we do recognize we are a large part of the community, which means we're a representative of what the community is, and therefore we have the obligation that all things flow in both directions. And so we enjoy the luxury or the right and the responsibility to employ local people and keep them busy, and realize for every job in here, there's a factor that says it creates 2.5 jobs outside the facility. We recognize that. And then part of that is giving back, whether it's to First Nations, to the community, to United Way. I get kind of excited about United Way because it's a goal that it's very easy to get excited about. And we've done some very good things in that. And of course, very enjoyable people to work with on that. So it is. It just goes back to it. It is a responsibility of mature organizations, especially of a certain size, is that giving back and participation is a requirement. It is a need of the community, and it's a need of the culture of the company that you're running.
Just about out of time here. We're going to wrap it up at this, though. Oh, and by the way, the investment in the Acuity unit at Royal Jubilee is an earlier podcast in this series. So if you go back
Okay.
onto the Chamber website, you'll
Very
find
good.
that. Just to wrap it up, though, you're a ship repair facility now, but there was ship building done at one time, right?
Mhm.
It's just not
Yes.
current. Tell me about
Mhm.
that a little bit.
Look at the thing is, we built basically a total of 41 vessels, and again, 8 orcas, one sea bus, 39 of, and I forgot the wrong acronym, but they were small vessels, basically multi-use vessels for the Coast Guard. However, once NSS was launched, once the decision was to put a major building facility in Vancouver, is the building part of our organization moved across the water to the mainland. And actually, as part of the NSS and such, is we are not allowed to be builders in certain areas because of the requirement, and having a sister division do it. So we support the building operation and everything else, but essentially in a lot of ways is we are not allowed to it because we have such a big piece of the pie under a national shipbuilding strategy, that us as a division, basically as a requirement of the contract, are no longer allowed to build. It did allow us to grow our workforce and grow our things, and the opportunity. I do remember is we didn't build them, we didn't bid them originally for profit. We did them for growth, to get experience to add to our workforce, but they were good enough. They actually turned them into profitable jobs. So there may be a phase somewhere down the road that we get back into that. But right now we're in a very comfortable space, basically supporting ship repair and conversion, especially on the large side.
Joe O'Rourke is the Vice President and General Manager of Seaspan Victoria Shipyards. This is the second part of a conversation we've been having with Joe on Chamber Chats. If you watch this one first, go back and watch the first one second, and then you'll get the whole story on this. It's fascinating and it's amazing, as I say, to see what happens at this quiet giant among our industry and business community. Joe O'Rourke, thank you so much for your time.
Bruce, it was a pleasure.
And that's how we do Chamber Chats. I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you next time.
For more episodes of Chamber Chats, go to checknews.ca/podcasts.